Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. For this week's episode, we're talking about a daily podcast that generated 5 million downloads in its first year. If you're in the media, then you're probably aware of The Daily, the massively successful podcast produced by the New York Times. It now receives over 4 million downloads a day and generates 8 million figures in revenue for the newspaper. But is it possible to replicate The Daily's success without the institutional support? That's the question Jamie East set out to answer. A year ago, he and a few colleagues launched The Smart 7, a 7-minute podcast that's published each weekday at 7 a.m. Its relatively simple format and consistency made it easy for listeners to build it into their daily habits, and within its first year, it hit 5 million downloads. I recently interviewed Jamie about why he struck off into indie podcasting when he already had a successful career in traditional broadcasting, and he explained how he plans to build an entire network of niche daily podcasts. Before we jump into the interview, I want to talk about my Substack newsletter. This week, I published a deep dive into Daily Detroit, a local podcast that's built a sustainable business through a combination of advertising and paid memberships. To the best of my memory, it's the first successful local podcast I've come across, and its founder walked me through how he built the business from the ground up. There's only one way to read case studies like this one, and it's by becoming a subscriber to my newsletter. Go to simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter. Okay, now on to my interview with Jamie. Hey, Jamie, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So you have a pretty eclectic background. Your first big entrepreneurial venture was a gossip website, right?
Yeah, goodness me. It feels like about 4 lifetimes ago. A lot of people say, they were different times, but they really were different times. It was early 2000s, and gossip was a real currency. It was a real. It was a genre of journalism that really rode the first wave of the internet, mainly because the internet offered speed and anonymity, and both things are like kindling to gossip. So it was really interesting to watch that grow as quickly as it did, and it was it was quite fortuitous to be part of its uprising as well. Although there was a lot of downside to it.
What was the name of the website?
It was called Holy Moly. Again, a lot of websites back then, it's weird to think that a whole business could be built on just a website, but that's how it was back then. And a lot of websites lived and breathed on their domain names as well. And Holy Moly was one that I got quite early on. It was originally going to be just like a design website for a bunch of my design friends and me. But I kept hold of it, and then it kind of suited the gossip side of things, and really took off over in the UK. Yeah, this was kind of like pre TMZ, pre Perez. Really, it was an exciting time.
And were you like really interested in celebrity gossip, or you just saw like a market opportunity?
Bit of both. I mean, I don't think that anyone can put their hands on their heart and say they're not interested in any form of gossip whatsoever. If they are, they're a better person than I am. So I enjoyed the kind of the salaciousness of it. It felt like good fun. Again, it was very different times back then. So it was two things. I had a bit of kind of skin in that game. I'd been in a band before, and with kind of like minor success in the UK, but along the way picked up a few interesting stories and kind of old wives' tales and folklore and stuff that you could use and that people enjoyed. And obviously, second to that, there was part of it where, my God, no one's doing this properly. There's no one out there making this as good as it could be. So and back then you could just crack on and do it. So that's exactly what I did.
And was it just you doing the writing?
It was at first, yeah. Well, kind of. I mean, it's the whole nature of gossip is that it comes from many, many people. So there were lots of people that discovered the anonymity of the internet at the same time, and who'd worked at record companies or worked on TV shows, or who had been chauffeurs or makeup artists of celebrities and stuff like that. And they all kind of converged onto the internet at the same kind of time. So I was an aggregator rather than it all coming from my brain. I was very much kind of aggregating a lot of stories and putting my own tone of voice on them.
Uh-huh. And so how big, can you give me a concept of how big it got? Like you mentioned TMZ, Perez Hilton. Was this like the UK equivalent?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it doesn't have, the UK doesn't have the reach that the US has. So whilst Perez and TMZ were doing big numbers, we were probably doing the equivalent of those numbers in the UK. It was at the time. I'm just trying to think back to. We were doing kind of like 6 million uniques a month, I think, which was pretty good for like 2002, 2003. I think. Goodness me, stats just disappear. Stats mean nothing now, do they? It's all likes. But yeah, it did the equivalent. Whatever Perez was doing in the States, I was the equivalent in the UK, but probably about 5 years before then.
And was it like on blogging software?
Yeah, it's well, I started my it was weird. It started off as just a project for me to learn how to code because I used to design and worked graphics for Sky News, which is just like a news channel over here in the UK. And there was like a bit of a gold rush for designers that could also code HTML. That was like, if you could do that, you could maybe get an extra 10K a year. And that was all I was thinking of. It's like, wow, if I learn how to code HTML or a bit of Flash or a bit of JavaScript, I can earn an extra 10K a year. So I went to and did that in my spare time. And the first website that I ever built was Holy Moly. So it was just like an old very old creaky kind of SQL database message board kind of thing that back in the day you just search other people's source code and just nick it.
And so how did you transition from gossip writing to being on TV?
As the site grew, it became quite difficult to monetize because it was basically pretty legally sensitive kind of content, really. So but as it grew, it attracted the attention of investors, and one of those investors was Endemol Shine, who for those that don't know, are one of the biggest kind of independent production companies in the UK. They do Big Brother, they did MasterChef, they do a whole bunch of huge kind of entertainment shows and quiz shows and all that. And they bought Holy Moly off me, or rather, I sold them 50% stake and reinvested that into the company. But part of that was around their relaunch of Big Brother in the UK. And it was a genuine kind of case, I guess, right time at the right place. They just bought the website. I was on camera for the website doing kind of like snarky, funny red carpet interviews. And they just launched Big Brother, so got me on there to basically to co-promote the website, but also to use the website to promote Big Brother as well. So it was a good fit. And that was how I ended up in front of the camera, really. It was, I'd like to say it was more calculating than that, but it wasn't. It all happened in about the space of 10 days.
And that's one of like the biggest reality TV shows in the UK, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's currently on hiatus. I mean, they always say it's been cancelled, but it'll be back in a few years. But yeah, at the time it had been on Channel 4 over here for a decade, and Channel 4 had just decided to let it go. And then Channel 5 bought it within weeks and put it back on the next year. So it's like a fast turnaround to get it going. So they needed the Holy Moly website to promote the fact that people could audition to go on the show. So, but yeah, it was a big deal.
So you eventually became somewhat of a recognizable celebrity in the UK yourself, then.
Yeah, for a period of time. Yeah, it was a fun couple of years. It felt quite strange, but yeah, own it. But on, I guess, on an A to Z, I was very much in the TUV kind of level, I would say.
And did that opened up doors for you, right, in other kinds of broadcast mediums? Like you started doing voice work, you started doing traditional radio.
Yeah, so I mean, it's such a tricky one when you spend so long building things up from a business point of view, and being a founder of a company and dealing with payroll and legals and all the kind of staffing issues and all the rest of it, to then go from that to being basically a pampered baby and being put on television where you get paid a pretty obscene amount of money for doing an obscenely little amount of work. It's difficult not to be, I guess, love struck by that side of things. So I ended up doing as much of that as I possibly could. It very much appealed to the lazy side of my nature. So I went from doing Big Brother. I did the official Game of Thrones show in the UK with HBO and Sky Atlantic. I did that for 4 or 5 years. That was fantastic fun. I did one.
That was like an after show or something.
Yeah,
like
it's like it was the official kind of after show for Game of Thrones. So it was brilliant because it was obviously filmed in Belfast, which was just around the corner. Kind of, spent a lot of time on the set there with the cast and doing all the premieres and stuff. So that was a blast. Then I did one for Westworld and a few other kind of like talking head stuff. I did got asked to do a lot of haunting shows. Over here there's a show called Most Haunted where psychics and kind of ghost hunters go around various haunted houses looking for things. I ended up hosting one of those, which was very strange. And then regular voiceover work, because if there's one thing that gives you more money for even less work, it's doing voiceovers. So I kind of followed that a bit, and then got a job on radio, which was again another curveball, really, which I wasn't expecting or even really looking for, but really enjoyed it. It's a different. They're all very different muscles. Writing and broadcasting and presenting they're kind of cut from the same cloth, but feel really quite different.
Well, given your success in broadcast media that, like you said, that pays really well for not a lot of work, what attracted you to podcasts?
The complete opposite. So I'm always interested in what's happening. I got a sense of the death of, I guess, online gossip was when Twitter and Facebook started to become as popular as they did, because they almost immediately overnight cancelled out any currency with gossip, because you can't hold on to anything. You can't hold on to a story. And also people rebuke the stories that you're writing immediately directed to their fan base. So the value of that kind of journalism, whether you like it or not, had kind of diminished overnight. So I was always quite keen on spotting trends and seeing things. And look, I mean, it wasn't exactly spotting a trend in 2020 to start doing a podcast, because I mean, America's been, I guess this feels like I think we're on our second wave of podcasts in the UK, but they never really went away in America, did they, for you guys? They've been kind of gradually growing for the best part of a decade. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, Serial obviously was a huge growth point, and now with the huge investments from Spotify and Amazon, and now all these others are getting in.
But Serial came along and had already, look at Serial kind of it was kind of ignited people's interest in podcasts. But had there not been a kind of vast swathe of pre-existing shows that American publishers have been doing for years before then, it may have fizzled out quite quickly. Luckily, there were others. I really enjoyed that Serial. There's tons more out there, and that kickstarted, the worldwide, I guess, the podcasting epidemic that we're in now. So it wasn't really the fact that I was spotting a growing trend. It was more you had to be in it to, you had to make a podcast. I tried a few different ones, and it was already a very crowded market in 2019 when I first started, and it took a while to kind of try and find something that A, not many people were doing, and B, that I knew that I could do well, because you don't want to be another white man just talking to another white man podcast. There are plenty of those. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, so you eventually launched a daily podcast. Why did you just, like, you were sort of already famous. You probably have some famous friends, or at least can get them on, or famous enough to get them on a podcast. You could have been like a Mark Maron or a Joe Rogan of the UK and have like a long form weekly interview podcast or something like that. Instead, you went like the route of a daily news podcast. Walk me through what your thinking was there.
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is because, I mean, those guys you mentioned are, they're brilliant at what they do. And also, I think there's a different appetite for those kind of podcasts in the UK than there is in the US. So I don't think we're a lot more cynical in the UK. I don't think it would have washed with an audience for me doing that. There are already a few people over here doing that. Adam Buxton does a great one. Louis Theroux's doing one. It's already really well served. So there was nothing I could bring to the table other than, like, as you say, being someone, I guess, mildly famous, speaking to someone hopefully more famous than me. But it feels like that's ever decreasing circles in the podcast kind of format. There are so many podcasts where it is just one famous person talking to another famous person. And A, I don't find it particularly relatable for listeners. And B, there's so many of them and they've been going on for so long that all the same people are just talking to different people, all the same people. There's just like this pool of people that can talk on podcasts that are just going around all the different podcasts. And to me, there's nothing there that would have really ignited anything different. And then the other side of things was the valuable lesson that I learned from creating Holy Moly was, don't make yourself intrinsic to the success of what it is you're making, because that was what happened with Holy Moly. And it became impossible for me to extrapolate myself from the brand and from the business without fundamentally damaging the brand and the business. So what I'm saying is I couldn't really sell it I couldn't really leave the business without destroying it. And that was a massive issue. So when I started thinking about this with Liam, my business partner, it was like, it's got to be something that eventually I can hand over the reins to, or, take a holiday from, and, this, that, and the other. So that was really important, that it didn't have my name on it and wasn't a podcast by a mildly famous person. It had to be just a good podcast.
But like the daily aspect, what appealed to that there?
Well, I guess just spotting a gap, really. I mean, I was producing, and I still am producing, a bunch of podcasts for Netflix and for Sky Atlantic over here in the UK. And through those productions and through talking to different platforms, your Acas, your Audio Booms, and your Apple and Spotify and the such like, it became apparent that where the trends that they were identifying as being priorities were short and more frequent. So we came up with the idea of the Smart 7 quite quickly because it was a process of elimination. It was, okay, what can this be if it's not a personality driven podcast, if it's going to be daily and it's going to be really short? There aren't many things that fit that criteria. And the most obvious one was news, because we didn't want to have to fight for anyone's podcast habits. That's a tough cookie to break. It's the same as launching a new radio station or a new breakfast show. What you're asking people to do isn't just to listen to your new thing. You're asking them to stop listening to that thing that they already like. And that's really, really difficult. So what the Smart 7 does and that format does, it offers them something that they can listen to on their way to the train station or on their way to the bus stop or whilst they're making the kids breakfast before they go about their daily regular habits. So we weren't fighting for any space. The space was already there. So it once we worked that out, it was pretty simple. And then all we had to do was make it sound good. And luckily, my experience in radio and my business partner Liam's experience in radio as well, we were able to do that. And it's quite surprising how many podcasts actually don't sound very good.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about the format that you landed on. Like you incorporate this concept of 7 that you use multiple ways.
Yeah, as we say now, we wish we'd chosen 8 because we'd have a lot longer to make it and an hour longer in bed. So it was look, it's a bit of a hook. It was, what time of day do we want to release this podcast? It was like, well, 7 a.m. feels like the sweet spot for people that are either, commuting to a big city or are going about their business at home and getting ready for work. So 7 a.m. was the sweet spot. It's okay. Well, if we're doing it at 7 a.m., how long should it be? If it's going to be short, well, 7 minutes kind of ties in, 7. It's okay. Well, how many stories are we going to do? It kind of presented itself to us, really. It was like, it's just a nice number. 10 feels like a lot and 5 feels like you're being slightly shortchanged. So 7, it was the perfect storm of right length, right time of day, right amount of stories. And we worked out, it's pretty well formatted. Liam, who's in charge of the editorial of it, he's got his kind of secret sauce down to a T. Each of the 7 slots has its own feel every morning and every day. And, there's a sport, there's a human interest, there's a pop culture, there's a US politics, there's a UK politics. There's, it has high production values, but quite a stringent editorial remit, which is what I think we need. It's regularity and consistency are the main things with podcasting.
So 7 a.m., 7 minutes, 7 items, 7 days, 7 days a week. Yeah. So 4 sevens.
Well, actually, it's 5. It's 6. It's 6 days.
Oh no, you broke it.
We broke us. Well, it's because when we decided on it was going to be for commuting, and obviously we launched, I think, the week after the pandemic hit, so we haven't actually been able to try it out with anyone commuting yet. So it was originally Monday to Friday. It was always going to be Monday to Friday. It may well move to 7 days someday, but it's not a lot of news happens at the weekend, so you'd have to tinker with the format anyway. But we do Monday to Friday, and then on Saturdays have a roundup kind of a compilation episode of the biggest stories of the week.
And when did you launch it?
April the 3rd. We're a year old. Yesterday. It was our first birthday. Yesterday, April 13th, 2020. I had just recovered from COVID, and Liam dragged me out of my sick bed, and we spent a good 6 weeks piloting it and getting it right and playing it to lots and lots of people and tweaking and test and learn, bit of A/B testing, and just launched and kind of hit the ground running straight away. It was great. It was really rewarding. One of the most rewarding business experiences I've ever had.
And so you just hit your anniversary. I think you've told me that you hit 5 million downloads in your first year, which is great for a independent podcast. How did you find an audience?
I mean, slowly. I think you hit the ground running. I used whatever profile I had to kind of give it that initial kick, which wasn't as big as you would imagine. But then you have to trust your product. We knew it was a good idea. We knew it sounded good. You just have to kind of dig your heels in and get your head down and dig deep and just keep on going with it. So it kept growing. Some weeks very small, some weeks they had big bumps. And then some of the platforms started taking note of what we were doing. It had been created because I knew that's the way that they were all heading. So by the time they got around to doing it, we were already there and established. So they took us on board and gave us some promotion and included us on some playlists and, all of that kind of stuff. There's been no marketing spend. There's been no real PR spend. We've started doing some PR recently just to kind of help some of the other verticals that we've launched out, but by and large, the kind of hero podcast is purely organic.
So you're talking about platforms. You're talking about Spotify, right? Because they're trying to create kind of daily lists that include both kind of news and music. So did they integrate you into those lists?
They did, yeah. That's right, yeah. In the UK, the Daily Drive podcast, and yeah, that did great things for us. And what was, I guess, it's always slightly worrying when things like that happen, because obviously it's great because it boosts your numbers, but in the back of your mind, thinking, oh my goodness, we're now reliant on one. When you've got one client, it's always a worry to a business when you've got one big major client that realistically could kind of cut the air supply off whenever they wanted. So it's been good to see that actually the people that have discovered us through there are now listening to us normally as well. So we've gained organic growth off the back of that, which has been really good to see.
Speaking of Daily Drive, what are you expecting once people start returning to work and the commute re-enters? Because I have this theory that we're just going to see this huge explosion that's even unexpected in podcast listening when that happens. Because when the pandemic first happened, there was a slowdown in downloads across the board for podcasts, and then eventually those numbers recovered. And I think a lot of people assumed that just meant that people were reorienting their day around podcast listening and incorporating it to the different parts of their day. But it also coincided at a time when Spotify was investing huge in expanding the audience of podcast listenership. And I think that was just maybe part of the natural growth of listening. And it wasn't just that people were reorienting their days. And if my theory is true, then we're going to, in another 2 or 3 months, once the population is fully vaccinated, I mean, we're going to see just a huge explosion of podcast listening as people return to their train commutes, their drives, stuff like that. Have you noticed any kind of recent jumps now that, people are starting to return to work, sort of?
Not really, because not yet. I certainly hope you're right. Believe me, I like the cut of your jibe, my friend. But over here, I think we're a little bit behind the States in terms of getting back to normal. It's only been a few days as we're recording this where shops have reopened and hair salons have reopened and all of that. So I think we are still some way off seeing an uplift in commuting. I mean, we certainly hope so. This was created for the commute. So the fact that it's become as successful as it has without anyone really commuting has been somewhat of a surprise, but a pleasant one. And we're kind of hoping that, like you say, when people start going back to work, that this becomes again part of their big habits. But I agree with you, is that I don't think we've touched the surface in terms of, certainly in the UK, in terms of a podcast audience. I think only 17% of UK citizens have listened to one, which is really small. But daily podcasts, I think daily podcasts account for just 1% of all podcasts, but account for 10% of downloads.
Wow.
Which is pretty impressive. I think a lot of that is skewed by the daily, but certainly shows that there's a huge appetite for what we're doing. But yeah, I need to readjust my marketing plan after you've said that.
So walk me through your typical workday for compiling each day's podcast.
Well, when we first started, we spent so long, and we got up at 3 a.m. and we kind of, as you do with all new projects, you have to find your groove. So we went through quite a laborious, sleep deprived kind of process to get to where we are now. Now we've got it down to a pretty good fine art, and the engine is pretty smooth. We spend probably a couple of hours towards the end of the day. News cycles, despite what we may think, aren't 24 hours at all. Newspapers run, pretty much 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And still newspapers tend to run the news cycle for news channels as well. So government, press releases, government announcements, a lot of them are still done with the view of, are we going to make the front pages tomorrow? Are we going to get there before the papers are put to bed the night before? Which is good for us. So it means that by, say, 10 p.m., we've got probably about 75% of tomorrow's episode already nailed, in terms of we know what it's going to be. We've got a sense of what the audio that we're going to use from that is going to be, and we've got a rough script. We don't finish the script. We don't finish writing the script until the very first thing, because the second you lock it in and pre-record the news, it's like Steve Martin in LA Story is the day that it rains for the first time in 30 years. So the day that we do that will be the day that something awful happens. So we always keep a slot free should there be any huge news overnight. And by huge news, things that generally happen overnight are election results, someone important dies, or something happens in sport or on an award show. So you kind of hold something back so that you are as up to date as possible. But generally, most news around the world for your day was pre-planned by 8 p.m. the night before.
You could have made your life a lot easier by calling it the Smart 6, and then having it at 6 p.m. every day for people's commute home, and then you could work a normal workday.
But don't forget, when we were doing this was just going to be a side hustle. So we came up with this as a side hustle that wouldn't stop either of us doing our day jobs. So we were kind of hedging our bets with it. So to do it at 6 p.m., you're right, it may have been a lot easier, but that would have taken half of our working day out. So the idea was that we could kind of like finish this, hit this to go live at 7 a.m., then go and get our kids to school and then go to work. That was the plan.
So how big is your staff?
It's pretty small. I mean, there's 1, 2, 3. There's about 5 people working on it, not all full time, all remotely. All to varying degrees. So, we've got some people doing social stuff. We've got, a couple of different voices on some of the different verticals, a couple of different writers, and a bit of marketing here and there. So very little. the cost base is extremely small because my expertise is production and making things sound good, so, which is actually usually the expensive part of making a podcast. So that's half the battle won, really.
And you do some original, it's mainly kind of aggregating stories and kind of paraphrasing and maybe adding in some audio clips. You do a little bit of original reporting. How does that fit into your workflow, and how do you kind of think about that?
At the moment, it's something we're trying out. I think we're definitely going to be doing more of it as we increase, like say, headcount and staff, because that's what those things eat into, is just time. We've seen a huge appetite from PRs and from TV channels or film companies, or to try and get their content on, if it's a new trailer or if their musician's got a soundbite, which is all well and good, but that's the kind of nice fluffy stuff at the end. And I think from our point of view, there's definitely an appetite. There's no reason why the Smart 7 shouldn't be present at number 10 Downing Street press conference, for instance. So that's something we've definitely got our eye on. But until we get to the point where we've got reporters asking questions that we want answered, which is probably still some way off, press conference audio is shared the world over anyway. We're not offering, there's no stealing of content. It's public domain anyway. So until we're in a position where Boris Johnson wants to speak to the Smart 7 reporter, there's no huge rush to do it.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like small audio clips where they actually will just record like a voice memo, right?
Yeah, so this is it, and that's why it's a dream to the representatives, or to the to the management of people, is that we don't need a 60-minute Zoom with them. We don't need to kind of be in person. If they've got a snappy soundbite that they want on, that we think is going to be relevant to our listenership, they can record that on their phones and just text it to us, for goodness sake. It's that simple. So we take away a lot of the pain that is involved in these people reaching their audience. We've got a massive audience, and they can reach it very easily and very simply. It's a pretty good combination.
How do you monetize?
Same as any podcast, it's through sponsored reads, it's through ads. Acas are doing a fantastic job, and I think we're sold out now until June. It's until certainly to the end of June, because there's no opinion on the Smart 7. We might offer a bit of a wry raised eyebrow every now and then, or make a slightly sarcastic comment, but there's no real opinion, so it doesn't alienate any audience. So from an advertiser's point of view, we're completely across every demo, across every, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Tory, Labour, whether you're 65 or 16, the Smart 7, because it's news and because it's entertaining news, appeals to every single person, and it's informative. So we can incorporate a lot of educational and governmental advertising, and we reach a large number of people. So therefore, your McDonald's and your big brands want to get in on it as well. So it's proved to be a pretty lethal combination.
So Acas, that's like a podcast host / advertising network / I think they even have a podcast playing app, right?
That's right. Yeah, they've got an app there. I mean, they're a one-stop shop, and I've been working with them for a long time, actually, on a lot of podcasts, and they just get it, and they understood very quickly what we were trying to do with it, and knew exactly how we wanted it to be sold, and they take a lot of the pain away.
So you're not doing like direct sales. You're basically, the relationship is you worry about the editorial content, and they're like, we'll take care of all the business and the tech side.
Yeah, I mean, direct sales is it's such a double-edged sword, because yes, it's appealing because you've got no one else taking a cut. You've got this, but I think you've got to have such high volume to make it worthwhile and to make it actually sellable. Acas do a great job, but they're selling, probably 50% of the biggest podcasts in the world. So they can do huge swathes of deals with huge brands. If you have your own direct sales for your one podcast, it better be a hell of a successful podcast, because, the numbers are good, but good enough to get your employee in a room with Facebook to sell them ads? Probably not. There's safety in numbers, I think, a lot of the time, and it's also real hard work. It's something I tried back in the day with Holy Moly, was hiring my own salespeople, and in the end, agencies just make it a lot easier and a lot better until you're at a tipping point scale where it just makes more sense just to have 3 or 4 people selling full time for you.
How much demand for podcast advertising is there in the UK? Like in the US, it's estimated somewhere around $1 billion, which sounds like a lot, but it's tiny compared to, radio advertising or TV advertising, or like even just like what Google and Facebook draws in. It's still a pretty tiny, budget within, a much larger advertising budget. As the UK, I get the sense that the UK is even less mature in the advertising market for podcasts.
It is. I mean, yeah, it's still, we're very much in the infancy all round, I think, for podcasting. And, we certainly look to the States to see where it's heading. But the fundamental difference between all of those more mature markets that you mentioned, like radio, like TV, even, Facebook and AdWords and whatnot, is that the cost base for producing podcasts can be really, really low and often are comparably to creating a radio station, then going selling ads off the back of that. Even if you're doing like a long-term, pre-recorded, high quality serial style podcast, the cost of that to market is still probably a 20th of what it would be to launch a breakfast show on radio, but generates, I would imagine, more money. So your margins are huge. So whilst the spend is really low over here, you can still make a viable business very, very quickly out of it. And I think it's important at this stage in the UK to take root and establish yourself as one of the main safe pair of hands as quickly as you possibly can. So that's what our plan is, really.
So you've since gone on to launch some new daily podcasts within your network. Tell me about that.
So we launched the Sports 7 probably about 6 months ago, 6 months into our Smart 7, just as because it was something we wanted to do. We knew that there was an audience out there. We had the right guy to write it and produce it and host it, who both Liam and I had worked with in the past, and it's been tough. It's been, sport is incredibly strange. Sports fans don't like multi-sport products. They like products about their sport, which, and I'm not a sports fan at all. I'm not a sports guy. So I take counsel quite a lot on sporting content, but it makes perfect sense. Why would an avid golf fan want to sit and listen to Formula One news? They don't give a flying fig about that. So it's been kind of interesting to watch that. So we're looking at what we can do with the Sports 7. We also launched the Science 7 very recently, which isn't 7 minutes long. It's a weekend episode that just takes a bit more of a relaxed kind of cup of coffee look through the interesting, quirky kind of science stories. And we get the scientists and the professors and all of the kind of professionals to leave us voice notes, and they drop it into a Dropbox and tell us all about their projects and all about their papers. And it's been really, really well received and really interesting to listen to. That's been a great, fun one to launch. And then, interestingly, we also launched an Irish edition of the regular Smart 7, just to kind of dip our toes into localizing the news. And that has been really, really interesting. And we're going to be doing a lot more of those, I think. So we sat down and looked at our slate and looked at how much content we were putting out, and estimated that actually probably 30-40% of this daily stuff that we're putting out is relevant to a large audience, not just UK, but possibly the United States, certainly in Ireland. So by doing an extra 10-20% amount of work, you can double your output really, really easily, which is what we did with the Irish edition. And that's gone crazy. That went kind of top 10 in Ireland within the first week, and is doing really, really well.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the sports podcasts. Like in the US, not only do you have lots of podcasts that are like focus on a specific sport, but you have like specific team podcasts that are incredibly,
Yeah.
popular. Do you think like you might have to pivot eventually to have like it might be the Smart Football 7 or something like that, where it's more focused on an actual sport?
I think so. I think probably. Yeah, I think certainly. I think there will always be a place for the Sports 7, just for the casual sports fan, and just for something good to listen to make you feel as though you're across everything. But we are looking at NBA, NFL, across lots of different markets, not just the States, but Japan's got a huge baseball audience, and just trying to work out, and one thing we've kind of noticed is that actually there aren't many sports news podcasts. A lot of certainly in America anyway, it's very opinion based. It's commentary. It's dissecting and deliberating. There isn't much out there that is doing what we're doing, thankfully. So there's an opportunity there for sure.
So how long until you come full circle and launch a celebrity news daily podcast?
That's already quite far along in the plan. We're looking at it. Celebrities it's a very different beast to when it wasn't to 2002. It's how you do that and who your audience are. They're a very different audience to the Smart 7. So we're just got to work out where they are. Are they on podcasts yet? I'm not sure they are. Will they be in a year's time? Hopefully. So it's on its way.
Okay, Jamie. Well, those are all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
Just easy. Just search for us in all the usual places. I mean, and everywhere. Just search for the Smart 7. It's there, and from there you will find all of our other ones as well.
Well, awesome. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Simon.
Okay, thanks for joining us. I'm actually on the lookout for new guests for this podcast. So if you do interesting stuff in digital content, whether you're a full-time YouTuber, a media executive, or run a cool niche newsletter, definitely reach out. My email address is simonowens@gmail.com. Okay, see you next week.